exiting the European Union consumer protection. I call the Minister to move. Minister Steve Brine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Happy New Year to you. I beg to move that the committee, or the House, shall consider the draft tobacco products and nicotine inhaling products (brackets amendment, etc. brackets EU exit close brackets regulations 2018. Smoking, Mr. Deputy Speaker, causes 78,000 deaths a year in England, accounting for 16% of all deaths annually. The United Kingdom is a global leader in tobacco control, and the government is committed and will remain so to ensuring that we continue that after we leave the European Union. As honourable members know, the government has negotiated a deal with the EU, and we're in the process of taking that through Parliament, as much discussed. The deal is designed to secure a smooth and orderly exit from the EU. At the same time, it is, of course, the job of responsible government, the Shadow Leader of the House is listening intently, I'm very pleased to say, to prepare for all possible scenarios. Now, we are committed to ensuring that our legislation and policy function effectively in the event of a no deal. It is for this scenario that these regulations have therefore been laid. If the UK reaches a deal with the EU, the Department will revoke or amend this instrument to reflect that agreement. Now, this instrument will ensure that the UK domestic legislation that implements the two main pieces of EU tobacco legislation, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Tobacco Products Directive and the Tobacco Advertising Directive, continue to function effectively after exit day at the end of March. This instrument also amends and revokes some EU tertiary legislation which will no longer apply to the UK after our withdrawal. The amendments and revocations are being made under the European Union Withdrawal Act 2018 and are necessary in order to correct deficiencies in the UK and EU legislation in the event of a no deal. The primary purpose, Madam Deputy Speaker, of this instrument is to ensure tobacco control legislation continues to function effectively after exit day. These proposed amendments are critical to ensure that there is minimal disruption to tobacco control if we do not reach a deal with the European Union. So this instrument introduces three main changes which I will set out. Firstly, in the event of no deal, the UK will need to develop its own domestic notification systems for companies who wish to sell tobacco products and e-cigarettes on the UK market. The notification process is essential for ensuring that companies are complying with legislation on product standards. Public Health England and the Medicine Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the MHRA, have already commenced work to ensure that domestic notification systems are in place and functional by exit day. Secondly, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the event of a no deal, the UK will not hold copyright to the EU library of picture warnings for tobacco products. Requiring the industry to continue to use these pictures would breach copyright law. Picture warnings are a key part of tobacco control, and it is therefore extremely important that we continue to require the inclusion of graphic picture warnings on tobacco products. The UK has therefore recently signed an agreement with the Australian government to obtain their picture warnings free of cost. Who knew? And this agreement covers all copyright issues. I'm very grateful to the Australian government for their assistance in this matter, Madam Deputy Speaker. Action on smoking and health support the proposals on notification systems and on the picture warnings as, quotes, pragmatic and practical, minimising the amount of additional work involved if there were to be a no-deal Brexit. And thirdly, Madam Deputy Speaker, this instrument proposes a transfer of powers. Currently, the Commission holds a range of powers under the Tobacco Products Directive, which enable it to respond to emerging threats, changing safety and quality standards, and technological advances. This instrument transfers these powers from the Commission to the Secretary of State. It should be noted that all powers in this category relate to technical, scientific, and administrative adjustments, which may be necessary to respond to changing circumstances in this space. This instrument will have some impact on the tobacco and e-cigarette industry. There is no getting away from that. My department ran a short technical consultation in October to seek feedback on the practical issues that will affect the industry in a no-deal situation. It focused on picture warnings and the notification process that I've outlined. We received 32 responses and have welcomed practical feedback on the issues highlighted in the consultation. Tobacco control stakeholders expressed support for the continued use of picture warnings as an effective way of stopping people smoking. They also showed support for the proposals to amend the notification system for e-cigarette and tobacco products as a means of harm reduction. The tobacco industry did raise concerns around the timing of implementation and cost, primarily in relation to the changes to the picture warnings. The department has consulted with external experts who confirm that the timescale for industry to implement these changes would be difficult, but certainly manageable. To support industry with these changes, the department intends to publish detailed guidance later this month. A word on the devolved administrations. It's also important to note that the DAs have provided their consent for the elements of the instrument which are considered to be devolved. Furthermore, we have engaged positively with the devolved administrations throughout the development of this instrument. This ongoing engagement has been warmly welcomed. I want to place that on the record for our friends in the devolved administrations. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, taking my lead from your look, members will have a chance to contribute. This instrument constitutes a necessary measure to ensure that our tobacco control regulations continue to work effectively after exit day. I should, however, emphasise that due to the instrument being made under the Withdrawal Act, I mentioned the scope of the amendments in this instrument is limited to achieving this objective. Therefore, at an appropriate point in the future, the Department will review where the UK's exit from the EU offers us opportunities to reappraise current regulations to ensure that we continue to protect the nation's health. And that is timely, of course, on this day of all days when we've published our long-term plan. So I urge honourable members to support the instrument proposed here to ensure the continuation of effective tobacco control and harm reduction, and I commend the regulations to the House.
The question is motion number 1 as on the order paper, and I do apologise to the Minister for my moment of inattention a minute ago. It wasn't inattention to what he was saying, it was that I had happened for the first time to look at the order before us, the statutory instrument before us, which for the first time in parliamentary history is, of course, illustrated. And if members have not yet had a chance to look at it, the illustrations are shocking. And I was making a mental note to myself, having listened carefully to what the Minister said, to make sure that every teenager I know sees these illustrations. But it's not for me to make any value judgment on whether or not one should smoke, vape or otherwise. The Minister has done that very well. Sharon Hodgson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it is indeed a pleasure to be here on this first day back this evening to discuss these very interesting and pictured, colourful, in full colour, amendment regulations on tobacco products and nicotine inhaling products, and also not tucked away in a committee room but actually on the floor of the House. As I've said in previous secondary legislation hearings on the EU exit amendments, I still strongly hope that we leave with a deal and that all of these SIs will have been for naught. But I do understand that as a matter of contingency planning, it is only right that we discuss these changes as a just-in-case measure. However, I have to say again, if a no-deal scenario was ruled out once and for all, then none of this would be necessary, saving vital taxpayers' money that could have been better spent elsewhere. And as I understand, these no-deal SIs run to around 900, Madam Deputy Speaker. That would be a substantial sum of money. But here we are. The Minister has already set out what these amendments will mean, so I will not repeat any of that. But smoking rates have declined. However, it's estimated that around 6.1 million adults in the UK still smoke. And I hope they were listening to your comments, Madam Deputy Speaker, and we all do show those awful images to as many people, young and old, as possible. It's never too late to quit. Hospital admissions attributable to smoking increased by 2% in 2016-17 compared to the previous year. And last year we also saw a small increase in the number of women smoking during pregnancy. And these figures aren't surprising when coupled with the fact that 96 million has been cut from the public health budgets this financial year alone, adding up to 800 million by 2021. That means cuts to vital public health services that I know both the Minister and I are passionate about, which of course includes smoking cessation services. I am clear that the government must reverse these public health budget cuts if it's serious about reducing smoking rates. And it's a shame that today the Secretary of State missed yet another opportunity to do this in his statement for the NHS 10-year plan. There was no reversal or new money, or any money, as I could say, for smoking cessation services or public health budget cuts. He did, however, maintain that prevention was at the forefront of the department's forward view, which was very welcome to hear. And if that is the case, the high standards for safety and quality standards for tobacco and nicotine products must be maintained or even improved if the UK leaves the EU without a deal. So with this in mind, I have a few questions around these amendments, and particularly have they any impact on the current advice on e-cigarettes? Will the government be undertaking any review on e-cigarette regulations to make sure they are fit for purpose, to encourage their use by smokers to quit smoking, whilst also discouraging uptake by young people? More generally, will the amendments allow for regular reviews and updates of the health warnings? Now, this takes me to the picture warnings on packets of cigarettes, which anyone who wants to look at what the new ones will be, they are in the order paper for these regulations. They will replace a number of unappealing photographs that we currently use with new photographs which are under copyright either by the Commonwealth of Australia or a professor called Lawrence J. Walsh of the University of Queensland. And I'm sure that this is a short-term fix, but could the Minister please elaborate and provide some clarity on what the agreement is with the Australian Government to use these photographs, or indeed with the professor? In what form was the agreement made? What does it cover? How and to what extent does it affect the rights of the copyright owners of these new images? What payment, if any, will the Australian Government or Professor Walsh be entitled to, or perhaps expect, as a result of us using their images? And what conditions and constraints will using these photographs have on any UK businesses? Also, what about all of the current packaging and cigarettes that currently exist using the old images? I'm hoping that some contingency has been made for those to continue to be sold. I'm under the impression that these photographs are still being evaluated by the Australian Government. If they are not found to be fit for purpose in Australia, will the Minister take that as therefore meaning they're not fit for purpose in the UK too? I know that the Government will be publishing detailed guidance on the picture warnings and the notification process this month, but it may be beneficial to business if the Minister could please give a better idea of when they might expect to receive this guidance. Finally, does the Government have any plans to use UK-sourced or commissioned photographs? Surely we have some comparable images of our own taken by doctors or researchers that we could use. If not, are any plans in place to acquire some? The legislation also introduces a fee-making power for characterising flavours and emissions on nicotine and tobacco products. Is this a power that the Government will be using immediately, and what impact will this have on businesses? Unfortunately, smoking is still prevalent in our country, and that is why we must ensure that tobacco and nicotine products meet the highest safety and quality standards. If the worst happens and we do leave the EU without a deal, we must ensure these standards are upheld. So the opposition will support these amendments today in the hope that they will not be needed. Thank you.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady from the front bench from the opposition. It is fair to say, I think, that all the tobacco regulations and changes that have been made in this House have been developed from the backbenches, and pressure has been put on the government of whichever government has been in power to make the necessary changes. So it is indeed a great pleasure to see my honourable friend the Minister and his opposition number, who both are tremendously supportive of making these necessary changes and implementing tough regulations on tobacco products. This clearly is one of those statutory instruments that will be required in the event that there is no deal going forward. But in any case, once we leave the European Union, we will be responsible for our own measures on tobacco enforcement. So it is timely that we debate this and decide it tonight before we move to the position of being outside the European Union. Clearly, the measures before us tonight are pragmatic and they minimise the amount of work required once we leave the European Union. I have one or two concerns which I hope the Minister can respond to in his summing up. At the moment, the system that's set out for notification of e-cigarettes and the novel tobacco products are reasonable and they minimise the additional work. But products that are notified to the UK prior to leaving the EU will not require re-notification. And the concern I have is whether there are such novel products that are going to come to the fore between now and departure date, and what the effect would be of having a deal and therefore another period of time in which those products could be introduced, and whether we'd need then to review how those particular products are dealt with under this statutory instrument. Secondly, obviously there's the issue which the Honourable Lady has mentioned about the picture warnings that we've obtained from Australia. One of the key issues here is that people who smoke get used to the fact that a packet of cigarettes contains messages. We need to rotate these messages, rotate these pictures, so they shock people. We want to shock people to stop them from smoking, particularly young people. So I think the concept of rotating pictures and identifying the best images possible to achieve that shock factor has to be a key point. And I trust that my honourable friend will look at this and keep this under review so that if we need to introduce that, we can. Clearly, there will need to be a longer-term review. And so my third point is that we need to see a report by the 20th of May 2021, which then gives us an opportunity to review all the regulations that apply not only to tobacco products, but to e-cigarettes and other heated tobacco products. Clearly, the Australian government are going to evaluate their various different initiatives, and it's fair to say that we have been in the forefront, both in Europe and across the world, in leading on tobacco control. It's therefore important that we encourage smokers to quit and prevent young people from starting to smoke. So will my honourable friend on the front bench undertake to review those regulations regularly so that we can encourage young people to stop, to encourage people to give up smoking along the way, and equally ensure that the measures are in place to ensure that people that want to give up are given help and support to do so, but more importantly, that doctors, in seeking to review people's cases, are directing people who smoke to be given the help and support that they need in order to give up and be better off regarding their own personal health. So I warmly welcome this statutory instrument tonight, but I hope that the Minister can give some reassurance on those three particular points.
Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Again, indeed, we are rushing through statutory instruments because of the threat of a no deal. And I would be interested to know from the Minister what things he might be doing differently if we weren't having to rush this through. Now, obviously, smoking is a critical cause of cancer, and while it has dropped over the last 20 years, there are still far too many people smoking. So I welcome the commitment that's within the explanatory memorandum and within the paper, which is committing to minimal change in tobacco control. It is important that we recognise that it also causes non-cancerous diseases, heart and lung disease and stroke, and is probably the biggest single cause of morbidity that we see in our country. It mentions that we are revoking the common European notification system, both for e-cigarettes as well as tobacco. This is not just tobacco, and that it will be replaced by a UK system. The Minister talked about MRHA taking on this work. Will it indeed be ready by the end of March? And as was mentioned by the Labour front bench, will the guidance to industry definitely appear before the end of this month? Because this is very close, and yet the government are asking industry to change the pictures they're using, maybe asking them to change how some of the warnings are constructed. It mentions under 53A the Secretary of State is able to collect fees to fund this. Will this be on a continuous basis in the sense of industry having to register with such a body and pay ongoing fees, or only on the registration of a new product? And what we may see is the same as we're likely to see with drugs, which is that if companies have to register a product in Europe and then go through a separate process here, they may not register that product. And while I'm not a big fan, obviously, of tobacco producers, those producing e-cigarettes and vapes that have helped people come off cigarettes, it's quite important that we don't undermine them. The new pictures have been mentioned, and the member from Harrow East talks about the need to rotate them, because unfortunately it doesn't matter what image you're talking about. If people are seeing it all the time, they become inured to it. And I think it's important that any regulations in the UK shadow what we've been doing with our EU colleagues as much as possible. The Minister talked about the consultation in October, and it referred in the explanatory memorandum to industry and stakeholders. Can he perhaps clarify for us whether any anti-smoking charities were represented or any health bodies? In 16A2, it gives the Secretary of State the ability to allow change in e-cigarette and vape formulations and standards. And what concerns me is that in the explanatory memorandum 6.4, there is a discussion that the standards may be too onerous. Now, that's not going to be too onerous for the user, but too onerous for industry and too restrictive. And I think it is absolutely critical that we do not lower these standards, because if this is just a decision that slips through without us being able to interrogate it, it may be something that we're going to regret further on. It is revoking the clause 2.4 from the 2006 Act, which does not allow any EU member state to advertise tobacco into another member state. And the explanation is EU member states could advertise tobacco here in the UK, and therefore we should revoke our obligation to not do that to them. Unfortunately, this is exactly the tit-for-tat race to the bottom the EU regulations were to avoid. So does the Minister really think that allowing UK companies to advertise into Ireland, Holland or France is something that's going to benefit people here? And I think it is of concern that 53A, which is the regulation on setting fees, is a statutory instrument that must be carried through by the affirmative process. But yet all other changes to regulations will be allowed to be carried through by the negative procedure. I think it is critical that the standards of tobacco production or e-cigarettes or vaping mixtures are maintained as high quality as possible. There is evidence that young people are beginning to use vaping de novo. Initially, they have brought great benefit by getting cigarette smokers off tobacco and vaping or using e-cigarettes. But it must be remembered, the pulmonary membrane in your lungs is the most sensitive membrane in the body. And we cannot allow the addition of harmful chemicals that might cause destruction or fibrosis and leave people crippled in the future. We do not yet have long-term experience of these vaping fluids, and it's critical that the government keeps them under observation and maintains as high a standard as possible.
Mark Pawsey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to follow on the remarks from the Honourable Lady, if I may, in respect of the impact of these regulations on vaping products. The vaping industry welcomes the government's sensible planning here, but has got particular concern regarding products that are already registered with the EU, and the industry producing products is looking for some clarification from the Minister and some assurance whether or not the products that are already registered will need to be re-registered under the new UK-based system. And the Minister has already spoken about the opportunity to reappraise our legislation. And of course, e-cigarettes are controlled by the tobacco products regulations, despite there of course being no tobacco in the products at all. But there are three particular issues that are of concern to users particularly, and the first is the cap on nicotine strength in vaping liquids. In many cases this is too low to encourage heavy smokers to switch to e-cigarettes, which we know are far better for their health and something that we want to encourage. And there are also restrictions on both the bottle size in which vaping liquids can be sold, and there are restrictions on the tank sizes for vaping devices, both of which appear to be completely arbitrary and no basis. And both users and the manufacturing sector in e-cigarettes is hoping that this will be an opportunity the Minister may be able to bring forward to rectify the regulations, which frankly are nonsensical. And I look forward to the Minister's response on those particular points.
Jim Shannon.
I'd be very, very succinct in my comments. Just want to ask a couple of quick questions to the Minister, if I can, please. Minister, you mentioned about first of all, welcome the amendments and legislation that's coming forward. I just want to. I asked the Minister a number of questions just before the holidays, and the questions came through the tobacco sector itself. So I want to ask the Minister, first of all, has he had any contact with the sector to seek their opinion in relation to the legislation to make sure that what's been put forward reflects their point of view? And the second point I want to ask is in relation to devolved administrations. The Minister referred to the devolved administrations, and I'm just ever mindful of where we are in Northern Ireland at this moment in time. Hopefully that will change. But we have a non-functioning assembly, which means that the responsibility for any administration of any legislation that comes through will fall on the heads of the Permanent Secretary or the civil servants. And first of all, I just want to ask the Minister, will that come as a statutory instrument? Will it come as where the Permanent Secretary can make the decision? Through the Northern Ireland Bill that we passed here at the Assembly just last year, we give the authority to the Permanent Secretary that he or she may make the legislative change. And I just want to make sure what way that will work for Northern Ireland. Madam Deputy Speaker, that's my succinct comments.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Just in a couple of minutes then, just a couple of points that have been raised in answer to the lady from Washington and Sunderland West. I mean, she says she hopes no deal contingency won't be needed. Well, fortunately, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have a cunning plan to ensure that it's not needed, which is to vote for the deal next Tuesday. And I look forward to her support. A number of people have talked about the e-cigarettes. I mean, look, the best thing that a smoker can do, and I've always said this for their health, is to quit smoking. E-cigarettes are not harmless. Nicotine is toxic. It's addictive, and there are unanswered questions on the effects long-term of their use. However, there's evidence that e-cigarettes are significantly less harmful to health than smoking tobacco. The control plan that I published last year commits to monitoring the safety, the uptake and the impact effectiveness of e-cigarettes and novel tobacco products, and we'll review all those regulations as part of our post-implementation plan by May 2021, and a number of people have referred to that, and I'm grateful. A number of people talked, the gentleman from Harrow, my honourable friend from Harrow East, and the lady from Washington Sunderland West, and the lady from Central Ayrshire talked about the rotation of the images and talked about the deal with the Australian government. Well, the deal with the Australian government is indeed to use their picture warnings free of cost. That's very, very kind of them from our friends down under. And yes, the rotation of picture warnings so people don't become desensitised to them is very important. We are aware of the benefits of rotating the warnings, so in the medium to long term we're going to consider our options, and this may well include the option of developing new domestic picture libraries. As the gentleman from Harrow said, there are plenty that I'm sure we can access domestically, and I'm wanting to be looking at that. In terms of, I think it was the gentleman from Harrow who talked about products that have already been notified. So developing the new notification system, which will be in place on exit day in a no-deal scenario. If there are novel products, they will be notified through this new system, and products notified between now and exit day, well, they'll continue to be notified through the EU system. We have to say I'm not aware of any novel products that are due to be notified by both the current and the new notification processes, but they'll be able to deal equally effectively with any novel products that appear on the market. I do think that this is an important instrument that the House is hearing. The lady from Central Ayrshire said that we must not in any way water down or lose our ambition on tobacco control, and I think she knows me well enough to know that I certainly don't lack ambition in this space, and one of the first things I did in this job was publish the tobacco control plan. It is still our biggest preventable killer, and she's absolutely right, of course, to say that, and it's why it is such a central part of the long-term plan is prevention, and one of the simpler things that we could do to prevent ill health and the cost that it has to our health service in England, and I'm sure in Scotland, and I know in Scotland, is to stop people smoking. She said about, well, will the notification system be ready? I think I said in my opening remarks that the feedback we have from industry is that that's going to be challenging, but absolutely the advice that we get from experts is that it will be ready. She raised the point about fees and then being charged on an ongoing basis. I'm going to have to write to her on that point, but I will endeavour to do that this week so that she gets the answer she wants, and I've already answered the question about not wanting to lower standards, which we most certainly do not want to do. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are absolutely committed to the tobacco control measures that I set out in the plan. I want to make sure that we maintain the discipline and make sure we maintain the focus on preventing ill health through driving down smoking rates, and we will review all of our tobacco control legislation by 2021. But in the event, which of course won't happen if the House supports the deal next Tuesday, Madam Deputy Speaker, then this won't be necessary. But in the event that it is necessary, we will be ready.
The question is, motion number 1 as on the order paper. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.